Hey there, weary internet traveler. Thanks for checking out my YouTube channel. I'm David. This is Mythic Concepts, and welcome. I kind of hit the limit of using my Game of Thrones YouTube channel to explore regular mythology, and so here we are with a whole new channel to talk about very old things. What you're about to watch is a live presentation I did last year about Chaoskampf mythology, which I've now edited down, cleaned up, and most importantly, packed full of pictures of old statues, bas-reliefs, carvings, and even modern art interpretations of the classic deities and mythemes. I'll mostly be doing shorter, scripted videos on this channel. However, I thought I'd start with this live presentation because it's going to act as a good preview of a lot of the mythology that I want to get into as we make more videos here on this channel. I decided to call the channel Mythic Concepts because the goal here is to get at the concepts that the gods and goddesses were created to represent, which I think is the most personally useful way to explore mythology. Now, don't worry, we will be doing the academic stuff too, and the just plain old interesting stuff. So I'll always be bringing you the latest research on genetics, linguistics, cultural dispersal patterns, anthropology, archaeology, and all that other fun stuff. Anything that will help us get to the bottom of what ancient man was actually trying to say with their very first written words and pictoglyphs. But by centering the concepts behind the mythology, we can begin to tap into the running philosophical conversation that mankind has had for thousands of years about being alive and dying and everything else that's a part of human existence. I also think that comparative mythology, which we're going to be doing a lot of on this channel, works the best if you center the concepts because, of course, the details and the names, those are the things that change, but the themes and the concepts behind the myth, those are the things that help us identify a common myth family. Those are the things that stay the same over thousands of years in many cases. I think you'll see what I mean in this Chaos Mother presentation that you're about to watch. So, with that said, please do me the honor of subscribing to the channel, and I will see you again very soon with a brand new real-world mythology video. But we're here to talk about the Chaoskampf myth, and of course, I'm talking about the universal myth of a storm god slaying some sort of dragon or monster associated with the ocean. It appears all over the world, all throughout Proto-Indo-European cultures, as well as many other cultures. And it's in A Song of Ice and Fire, guys. Those of you who, know Game of Thrones, Robert and Rhaegar. Robert is a storm god. He slays the dragon in the middle of the river. It's a classic version of an old myth. And the quick examples, I'm going to be doing some screen sharing with my notes today so you guys can follow along. It's going to be a very information-heavy program here. And so some of you guys are visual learners. So I'm going to leave my notes up on the screen. And the art is, in many cases, how we know a lot about these deities, because in some cases there isn't a lot of a written record. And so the art is really important as far as figuring out what they're doing and stuff. But like I said, the Chaoskampf myth, it appears all over the world. Primarily about a storm god slaying a dragon or sea god or some combination of those ideas, which leads to great floods and either the creation of the world or the remaking of the world. So sometimes it is the actual creation myth of a given culture. Sometimes we find the creation myth separated from the dragonslayer myth. However, and this is kind of the big point of this live stream, when that separation does happen, we find the dragon ideas present in the creation myth as well, because the actual idea here has to do with order and chaos. We might even just say the clash and the song of polar opposites being the thing that gives rise to creation. That's really the topic. And one thing that I'm going to try to offer on this stream is the meaning of all this. So I've been watching videos, I've been taking online courses, I've been reading all about this Chaoskampf myth and individually following each one of these stories. And most of the people throughout academia who are talking about these myths, they stick to just kind of the raw facts of what we know, very cautious with interpretation and stuff like that. But of course, one of the things that I believe strongly in is that the whole idea of gods, goddesses, and myths, it's basically, these are just symbolic mechanisms to talk about concepts. I question how many people actually believed these gods were real entities. And although a lot of people did believe that, I think the people who were writing these myths, the priests, sort of, that sort of intelligentsia class that involved with the myth making, I think most of them were well aware that these were in fact symbols. And if you go to certain culture, again, it's hard to know what people actually thought 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. But in the cultures where we have more evidence, like say Egypt, for example, it's very clear that most of them understood gods as symbols, as devices to talk about concepts. So when we talk about the dragon goddess, the primordial ocean of chaos goddess that we're going to be seeing throughout all these myths, it's actually the principle that's important here, not the idea of a dragon or even the ocean. All of those things are actually are just symbols to try to understand a concept. And the concept here is order versus chaos. But the thing is that the word chaos kind of needs to be redefined from what you'd think about it at first. And in a lot of these myths, we're going to see that the chaos dragon becomes a monster. It becomes straight up evil. However, the original idea is not of evil and good, but rather structure and lack of structure. We might even call it potential. And shout out to my friend Shad, one of my best friends I like to bounce ideas off of. We were going around with this idea, and he really settled on the idea of potential and then a thing that exists, right? When something doesn't exist yet and it's just an idea in your head, it's chaotic because it doesn't have form yet. It's formless. It's an impulse, an instinct. But then once you create it, it becomes a thing. And it's an object. It's structured, it has permanence, it exists, it's concrete. But of course, as all of you know who are, creative, it's never about the thing that you've created, but always the next thing that you're going to create. So there's always this cycle of like having an idea of potential and then creating it, and then moving on to the next idea. So that's one way to look at it. If you want to think about order and chaos in a way that is outside of good and evil, and I'll make myself a little bigger since I'm not going off the notes yet. Think about the amount of structure that you might employ in your life. Everyone has a different idea of how much structure is good. Like for me, I'm a very unstructured person. I have ADHD, and I thrive in a sort of organized chaos. This shelf behind me is absolutely like the most organized thing in my life, probably. And it's still a kind of controlled chaos, right? Some people, they do better when they have a schedule and when they have reminders on their phone for everything and they write everything down and they have a planner, a to-do list. Those things don't work for me as well. I do better sort of just following my instinct at a given moment. And I've learned how to structure my day and my sleep cycles to work with that. So I'm a person that lives with a little more chaos in my life. But other people, like I said, are different than me, and they might have more structure in their life. And so everybody's familiar with that dichotomy, that balance of, like I said, structure, orderly thinking, versus something that's just totally messy and chaotic. There's obviously the extremes on one end of the other. If you have total chaos, then you have no structure at all. And that's the idea of the primordial chaos ocean. All right. So when people are trying to talk about creation, what's all of our model for creation? Parents having sex and creating children, right? That's how we create life. And so all of the myths, not all of them, but all the myths we're going to deal with today anyways, are going to have that sort of principle where you see two opposing forces mingling, and this mingling, this song, harmonization of two different wavelengths, if you want to think about it that way, that is what creates material reality. So that's the idea underlying all these Chaoskampf myths and creation myths. So that being said, I'm going to go through these real quick and list them, and then we're going to follow up and we're going to go in detail. There we go. So we've got 7 cultures that I'm going to take a look at today, and I'll explain why I chose these 7. We've got the Sumerian / Babylonian / Akkadian mythology. That's the Mesopotamian culture. And that's approximately the order: Sumerians, Babylonians, and then Akkadians. But then there was some back and forth and mingling and all that stuff. So we're going to talk about Sumerian myth, but just know that I'm talking about Babylonian, Akkadian, and Sumerian myth together because it all got rolled together. Okay, so the way that I've got this organized actually is I've got the creation myth and then the dragonslayer myth. And like I said, sometimes they're separate, sometimes they're the same. So in the Sumerian myth, in the creation myth, we have Tiamat, who originally is the saltwater ocean, and it mingles with Abzu, who's the freshwater ocean. And the reason why they had this idea is because in the Persian Gulf, There are many places where the salt water and the fresh water mingle. And so this is sort of a visual example that was fresh in the minds of the people around that area. You'll see some similar ideas as far as the waters, two waters mingling. Sometimes it's the waters below and the waters above. They're talking about space or the heavenly firmament as water that gets divided. So there's a lot of ideas about waters mingling, waters being divided. And in the Sumerian myth, like I said, it's Tiamat as a saltwater entity and Abzu as the freshwater entity. They create all of the gods. From their ocean mingling arises the gods. And that's another motif you'll see a lot. You'll see a primordial mound or something like that rising out of the ocean, right? So Canaanite myth and Hebrew myth are closely related because the Hebrew peoples originally were Canaanites that sort of splintered off. And the Canaanite culture in the Levant, it was not a homogenous culture. There was never one Canaanite kingdom. Think more of groups of peoples that shared similar beliefs, similar gods, but then varied, subtly by area. And like I said, over time, things change. One people moves in, other people splinter off. So Hebrews grew out of Canaanite culture. And so that's reflected in their mythology. So we're going to talk about those two kind of together. Then we've got Egyptian myth, which of course is, some of the oldest and most detailed sets of mythology that we have from any culture. And the thing about Egyptian culture is that it's actually should be seen in a continuity with Mesopotamian culture and the Levant culture, because essentially all of those people, the people that we think of as Egyptians, Israelites, Syrians, the people from Mesopotamia, they all descend from indigenous peoples that have lived in that area since like 20,000 BC. And not only that, people have been crossing back and forth from North Africa, Egypt, Sudan area to Mesopotamia, to the Fertile Crescent, all the way to the Indus Valley, going back that far as well. So we're going to see this trading of ideas, trading of crops, genetics, all that stuff. So it's no surprise, this is the point, that we're going to find similar mythology with all of these Fertile Crescent cultures, including Egypt in that sort of greater area. Then we've got an entirely different diaspora, which is known as Proto-Indo-European. And the Proto-Indo-Europeans were people that originated in kind of north of the Black Sea area in the steppe land, essentially, of East Asia, West Asia, yeah, I guess it would be Eastern Europe. And they sort of spread out everywhere. And they're called Proto-Indo-Europeans because they literally left their genes and culture all the way from India, all throughout Europe, all the way up to the British Isles. And so we're going to find similarities between Celtic myth and Old Germanic myth and Vedic Indian myth. And that's because they have these common ancestors that go all the way back to about 5,000, 6,000 BC. And they spread out over the course of like 4,000 years. The cool thing about Proto-Indo-European culture is that they have, if you look at all the descendant cultures of Proto-Indo-European, you find all these commonalities, including this storm god slays the dragon myth. The thing is, though, that everywhere the Proto-Indo-Europeans went, they brought their mythology, but it also mixed with the mythology of the people living in that area. So, for example, the Proto-Indo-Europeans eventually became something called the Andronovo culture, which then came into India around 1500 BC. And this was where the Vedic myth came from. It was a combination of these Proto-Indo-European Andronovo culture people mixing with the Harappan Indus Valley civilization. And so the Vedic myth that we get now is basically it's all zipped up. And it's hard to tell what comes from where. We can see some things come from Proto-Indo-European, but then we have images of Shiva in a yogic posture going back to the Harappan culture before the Proto-Indo-Europeans. So Shiva and yoga, which is a main feature of Hindu mythology, seems to predate the Proto-Indo-Europeans, even though the Proto-Indo-Europeans brought all this other stuff, the dragonslayer myth and Indra and all this thing. So that's all a long way of saying none of this can be cleanly divided. No culture evolved their mythology in isolation. They're all mingling. There are specific waves of migrations that we can follow. But it's a lot of fun because the way that I look at this, guys, is like a running conversation about basically esoteric concepts. All these people across time and place, they're using symbols and myths to discuss like the deepest most esoteric philosophical concepts that, that humans have always worked with, have always dealt with. And so when we look at this chaos mother dragon entity that we're going to talk about, in some cases, it's definitely two cultures talking to each other and trading a very similar idea. In other times, it might be people that are mostly separate, just trying to get at the same concept and end up using some of the same language. So it's interesting to trace the origins, but really what I'm after is the conversation and trying to figure out what all these people are saying about creation and about chaos and structure and order and all that stuff. So there's your introduction. So like I said, we've got our Mesopotamian myth, our Egyptian myth. Let's see here. In Egyptian myth, the creation myths there's several, and we're going to read through several of them. Even though they appear to be different, they're not seen as conflicting for the exact reason is that they're all symbolic concepts. And when you get at the concepts behind the myths, you can see how they're all talking about the same thing, even though one myth has one god creating the universe and the other myth has 8 gods together in a pond, the Ogdoad creating the universe. So similar concepts. And then, of course, Egyptian myth does have a serpent. That's Apep, the monstrous serpent dragon. It specifically represents chaos and darkness. And Ra, the sun god, is constantly struggling with Apep. It slays him in one myth, but it's mostly depicted as a struggle. In Vedic Indian myth, as I mentioned, it's Indra is a storm god, and he has a part in one of their creation myths separating heaven and earth, which is the same thing that Yahweh does in Genesis. And then there's all these creation myths about Kali that we're going to talk about, because Kali is perhaps, my favorite depiction of the chaos mother. So we're going to talk about Kali. But Indra, of course, like I said, is a storm god, and he slays the dragon Vritra. And that leads to floods and the remaking of the world and an ascendancy of Indra as the new top god. And that's another thing that we'll see with a lot of these. The storm god frequently takes over from the sky father god when he slays the dragon. And a lot of these myths are actually written to sort of legitimize the storm god as the new top god. And so part of the narrative of these myths are explaining to you, here's how Indra took over from Deus Pater, who was the original sky father. Then in Greek myth, of course, you guys probably know Greek and Norse myth the best. They're two of the most commonly known mythologies in Western culture. So, of course, Zeus slays Typhon, and that cements the ascendance of the Olympian gods. The world is nearly destroyed. It's a very Ragnarok-like thing. Typhon is a monstrous dragon serpent. And then in the Greek creation myth, we have literally a god called Chaos, who gives birth to Gaia, Tartarus, and Eros, which is the earth, the underworld, and love. And in this case, love should be seen as like the animating force, which then enables the rest of creation. So we're going to get into that. And then with Norse myth, of course, the dragonslayer one is Thor slaying Jormungandr, which is, he fights with Jormungandr a couple times, and then at Ragnarok, he's supposed to slay Jormungandr. And this will, of course, lead to lots of cataclysms and the remaking of the world and all that stuff. So you can see at a glance, all of these myths have very similar themes. But when you get into the specifics, then this stuff gets really, really interesting. So I'd like to start off with the Sumerian myth. The Sumerian myth is the oldest that we know of, although, of course, that's subject to change at any time. And the Egyptian stuff is pretty old as well. And yes, we're serious today. We're not goofing around. There's no wigs and silly hats. I did wear my Tool shirt, just so you know I'm not an academic. I didn't go to college, folks. So, and a word of serious humility. I am doing my best to represent the beliefs of multiple cultures and peoples. So obviously, this is a tricky thing. I'm hoping that you guys watching will cut me some slack if I phrase anything wrong, if I'm explaining things too simply, because I'm going to be sort of generalizing more complex ideas in a lot of these cases. So I am doing my best. I have a lot of reverence and respect for these myths, and I hope that comes across. And of course, a lot of this is subject to ongoing academic review and debate and all those things. So, we'll talk about it with a lot of caveats and seems like and may mean this and that kind of thing. So we're following the concepts, folks. And like I said, Sumerian creation begins with a freshwater, saltwater dichotomy. So first we have Abzu or Apsu, and he's the name for the fresh water from the underground aquifers, which was given a religious fertilizing quality in Sumerian and Akkadian mythology. So lakes, springs, rivers, wells, any source of fresh water that comes from the earth. It's thought to draw their water from this underground ocean called the Abzu. And so it's the source of pure water, if you will. For you Game of Thrones people, the Dothraki call seawater the poison salt sea because horses can't drink it. So there's this idea that fresh water is nourishing, salt water, even though obviously there's things that live in the sea, the sea is a place that is inimical to mankind. It's hard for us to survive in the sea. We have to bring a boat or else we will die pretty soon. So the sea stands in for a symbol of chaos, disorder, all the scary things, the unknown, the subconscious, all that kind of stuff. That's what the sea represents. So it's pretty easy to see why the fresh water and the salt water has this sort of dichotomy here. Oh, I see we've got an Akhenaten stand. Yes, the Egyptians did dabble with monotheism briefly. But for the most part, monotheism is kind of a freak development. Most of the world's been polytheistic for all of its history. And what's cool is we are going to talk about, ancient Hebrew religion, which shifted from polytheism to monotheism. And when you look at even the monotheistic version of the creation myth, you'll still see the echoes of the polytheistic ideas in there. So that's one thing to look for. It's going to be fun. Thank you, Jace. So we got Absu, the fresh water, and then we've got Tiamat. Like I said, later appears as a dragon, but first, basically just a symbol of the chaos of the primordial creation. She represents salt water. She gives birth to the first deities. So the waters mingle and the creation rises from it. And here I'm going to read from the Enuma Elish, which is the Babylonian creation myth. And those of you who know Genesis, you'll hear the echoes of it here. Okay, so when the heavens above did not exist, and the earth beneath had not come into being, there was Absu, the first in order, their begetter, and Demiurge Tiamat, who gave birth to them all. They had mingled their waters together before meadowland had coalesced, and reedbed was to be found, when not one of the gods had been formed, or had come into being, when no destinies had been decreed. The gods were created within them. So this is before everything. All right, and that the word Enuma Elish, that phrase means when on high, and that's actually the literal translation of the first line. When the heavens above did not exist. So when on high, the heavens did not exist. That's Enuma Elish. So compare that now to Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. Let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place. Let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. So you can see this similar concept, first of all, of separating the waters from the waters, separating day from night. So everything begins as a continuity with no division, no order, just a big singular thing. So when it says that God moved over the face of the waters, this is the primordial chaos ocean. And in fact, the word used for deep right here is tehom, which has a similar root as Tiamat. And scholars used to think it was literally a reference to Tiamat. Now they've backed off that and they think it's just a similar phonetic root. But you can see the point. It's not just the face of the deep. It's like the deep abyss, waters of the deep abyss. It is the primordial ocean. So God's hovering over the face of the waters. He's the creative thing here. So instead of there being two deities, one of them is now just water, and one of them is God Almighty. But it's still the same idea. And there's also a little bit of a polemic here. And of course, the reason why Genesis mirrors all these Mesopotamian myths, guys, this isn't them. It's not a copy. What it is it's called a polemic. And this was real common in mythology. Since these people were all trading ideas and were aware of each other's beliefs, what they would do is they would write a story about their God, where their God possesses the powers or attributes of a rival deity as a way of saying, no, Our God is the one who separated the waters. Our God is the one who rides the storm, et cetera, et cetera. And so what they're doing is they're taking this polytheistic creation myth and they're saying, no, actually, it was only one God. And he didn't even need to fight. There's no struggle here. The waters are already subdued. So in a lot of the dragonslayer myths, you're going to see this storm god, which, by the way, Yahweh has many attributes of a storm god, and many people think he originally was a storm god. The storm god has to subdue the chaos ocean to create the earth. And we're about to see that in the rest of the Enuma Elish. And so the whole point of the Genesis myth is that Yahweh is so powerful, he doesn't even need to fight with the chaos ocean. It's just already subdued. He simply moves over it and creates from it. But it's still the same idea of separating this thing that was one into the heavenly expanse, the waters above, and the waters below. So very cool. It's just Absu and Tiamat ideas, but expressed in a monotheistic paradigm. And so I'm going to jump over to the Sumerian dragon slayer myth, which is Marduk and Tiamat. So Marduk is kind of a sky god and a storm god. He commands the four winds, the rain, flood, and the lightning. So pretty typical storm god stuff. There is sometimes overlap with sky god and storm god things. And a lot of, again, like I said, the storm god frequently ascends and takes over the father god's role in these myths. And the father god in this case was Enlil and Ea. And both of those deities were sort of subsumed to Marduk over time. So he has attributes of both a sky god and a storm god. The name Marduk means calf of the sun. He's famous for wielding a wind weapon, which is what he uses to slay Tiamat. And his symbolic animal and servant is a different dragon, which he vanquished in a different story. So he's associated with vanquishing dragons all over the place. And that one's called Mushusu. So the thing is, like I said, Marduk, he took over from Enlil. Enlil, he is Sumerian storm god. Remember, the Babylonians came after the Sumerians, and Marduk is a Babylonian god. So even while they adopted Enlil, they elevated Marduk to supremacy. Enlil originally was the god of the wind, the air, the earth, storms, and also the patron of agriculture, which is another big, storm god, sky father. The idea is that's where the rain comes from. The rain is what causes the crops to grow. So Enlil's also called a raging bull in a wild storm. All these storm gods are bull gods, from Zeus to Indra. They're almost all associated with bulls. So Enlil originally plays a role in the Sumerian creation myth by separating An, which is heaven, from Ki, which is the earth. And that makes the world habitable for humans. So again, we're separating two things to create a habitable space. Same idea. So Enlil was the patron god for the Sumerian city-state of Nippur, and his main center of worship was a temple, which was, the name literally means mountain house. And the interesting thing here is that it's believed to have been built by Enlil himself, and it's thought of as a mooring rope of heaven and earth. So this is like one of those Ben stones that functions as the world tree, the cosmic axis. It's the place where heaven and earth can meet. That is also associated with the primordial mound, as we'll see in Egyptian myth. There's also this deity called Ninurta. This is a similar deity because it has the power to release humans from sickness and demons. And there's an image that is commonly identified with Marduk and Tiamat, which actually might be Ninurta slaying the Anzu bird. And I'm going to pull that image up. This is a real famous one. You guys will recognize this. You've seen this before. This could be Marduk and Tiamat, but it's more likely the Anzu bird, which, as you can see, looks like kind of a dragon anyways. It's very much a conglomerate chimera type animal. We're not sure if these are a thunderbolt kind of weapons or what, but again, you find different versions and echoes of these myths. So I just want to give Ninurta a shout out because this might be Ninurta, but I don't want to go into that myth too much. It's a little bit off the beaten path. Okay, so now I'm going to read the Enuma Elish. It's fun to talk about this in sort of generalities and summaries, and that's how you're going to see it when you research this and you watch videos. It's just going to be people summarizing and stuff. But I find there's a power in reading the text itself. And so here is some sections from the Enuma Elish. It's going to be the first and second tablet, which is the same thing as a chapter here. What they plotted in their gathering was reported to the gods, their sons. The gods heard it and were frantic. They were overcome with silence and sat quietly. And this is when they hear about Tiamat planning to destroy the world. Ea, who excels in knowledge, the skilled and learned. Ea, who knows everything, perceived their tricks. He fashioned it and made it to be all-embracing. He executed it skillfully as supreme, his pure incantation. He recited it and set it on the waters. He poured sleep upon him as he was slumbering deeply. He put Absu to slumber as he poured out sleep. And Mamu, the counselor, was breathless with agitation. He split Absu's sinews, ripped off his crown, carried away his aura, and put it on himself. He bound Absu and killed him. Mamu he confined and handed roughly. And Mamu is Absu's assistant or vizier, I think is the word they use. As they laid hold on Mamu, keeping the nose rope in his hand, after Ea had bound and slain his enemies, had achieved victory over his foes, he rested quietly in his chamber. He called it Absu, whose shrines he appointed. Then he founded his living quarters within it. And Ea and Damkina, his wife, sat in splendor. In the chamber of the destinies, the room of the archetypes, the wisest of the wise, the sage of the gods, Baal was conceived. In Absu, and that's another name for Marduk. In Absu was Marduk born. In pure Absu was Marduk born. Ea, his father, begat him. Damkina, his mother, bore him. So we see that first we have a slaying of the father god, and his body is turned into a living place for Ea. But that's not the world yet. It is, however, a similar idea of slaying a god, making a home for him. But Tiamat is the real deal. So Tiamat's consort has now been killed, and she has grown angry at her children. She's been encouraged to strike back and kill her children. And after she listens to a speech about that, it says, Tiamat heard the speech pleased her. She said, let us make demons as you have advised. The gods assembled within her. They conceived evil against the gods, their begetters. They, missing line, and took the side of Tiamat, fiercely plotting, unresting by night and day, lusting for battle, raging, storming. They set up a host to bring about conflict. Mother Huber, who forms everything, supplied irresistible weapons and gave birth to giant serpents. They had sharp teeth. They were merciless. With poison instead of blood, she filled their bodies. She clothed the fearful monsters with dread. She loaded them with an aura and made them godlike. She said, let their onlooker feebly perish. May they constantly leap forward and never retire. She created the Hydra, the dragon, the hairy hero, the great demon, the savage dog, and the scorpion man, fierce demons, the fish man and the bull man, carriers of merciless weapons, fearless in the face of battle. Her commands were tremendous, not to be resisted, although she made 11 of that kind. Among the gods, her sons, whom she constituted her host, she exalted Kingu and magnified him among them. The leadership of the army, the direction of the host, the bearing of weapons, campaigning, the mobilization of conflict, the chief executive power of battle, supreme command, she entrusted to him and set him on a throne. So she's exalted Kingu, her general essentially, and says, I have cast the spell for you and exalted you in the host of the gods. I have delivered to you the rule of all the gods. You are indeed exalted, my spouse. You are renowned. Let your commands prevail over all the Anunnaki. She gave him the tablet of destinies and fastened it to his breast, saying, your order may not be changed. Let the utterance of your mouth be firm. After Kingu was elevated and acquired the power of Anuship, and that means he's now made king of gods, he decreed the destinies for the gods, her sons. May the utterance of your mouths subdue the fire god. May your poison by its accumulation put down aggression. So now the gods are afraid. They hear about all this preparations, Tiamat coming to destroy them. And so it says, Ensar heard the matter was profoundly disturbing. He cried, woe, and bit his lip. His heart was in fury. His mind could not be calmed. Over Ea, his son, his cry was faltering. And that Ansar, that's just Absu. No, it's not Absu. It's who is Ansar? I think Ansar is the father of Ea in some tales. Let me look this up real quick. So Ansar and Kisar are a pair of primordials, male and female, representing heaven and earth. Oh, An and Ki. Okay, gotcha. That's who that is. So basically, heaven is saying to Ea, his son, you set out and killed Absu, my son. You who provoked the war, take responsibility for whatever you alone have done. You set out and killed Absu. And as for Tiamat, who you made furious, where is her equal? The gatherer of counsel, the learned prince, the creator of wisdom, the god Nudinamud, with soothing words and calming utterance, gently answered his father Ansar, "My father, deep mind, who decrees destiny, who has the power to bring into being and destroy. Ansar, deep mind, who decrees destiny, I want to say something to you. Calm down for me for a moment, and consider that I performed a helpful deed before I killed Absu. Who could have seen the present situation? Before I quickly made an end to him, what were the circumstances were I to destroy him?" Ansar heard, the words pleased him. His heart relaxed to speak to Ea. "My son, your deeds are fitting for a god. You are capable of a fierce, unequaled blow. Go before Tiamat and appease her attack." Missing line, her fury with your incantation. He heard the speech of Ansar, his father. He took the road to her, proceeded on the route to her. He went. He perceived the tricks of Tiamat. He stopped, fell silent, and turned back. He entered the presence of august Ansar, penitently addressing him, "My father, Tiamat's deeds are too much for me. I perceived her planning, and my incantation was not equal to it. Her strength is mighty. She is full of dread. She is altogether very strong. None can go against her. Her very loud cry did not diminish. I became afraid of her cry and turned back. My father, do not lose hope. Send a second person against her. The woman's strength is very great. It is not equal to a man's. Disband her cohorts. Break up her plans before she lays her hands on us." Ansar cried out in intense fury, addressing Anu, his son. "Honored son, hero, warrior, whose strength is mighty, whose attack is irresistible, hasten and stand before Tiamat. Appease her rage, that her heart may relax. If she does not hearken to your words, address her words of petition that she may be appeased." So they send another god against him. He comes back. "Tiamat's deeds are too much for me. I perceived her planning, but my incantation was not equal to it." It goes on and on. So nobody can face Tiamat. Essentially, that's what happened. The Anunnaki are trembling in their boots, if you will. And this is when Ea summons Marduk, his son. And he says, "Go, my son, conversant with all knowledge, appease Tiamat with your pure spell, drive the storm chariot without delay, and with a," missing word, "which cannot be repelled, turn her back." Probably something about the wind. And it says, Baal, which is Marduk, rejoiced at his father's words. With glad heart he addressed his father, "Lord of the gods, destiny of the great gods, if I should become your avenger, if I should bind Tiamat and preserve you, convene an assembly and proclaim for me an exalted destiny." And so basically he makes a deal to become the king of gods if he wins the fight. And so they do. They exalt him king of gods actually before he goes to the fight. And here's one of the lines about him being given the Anuship, which means, the kingship. It says, "They set a constellation in the middle and addressed Marduk, their son. Your destiny, Baal, is superior to that of all the gods. Command and bring about annihilation and recreation. Let the constellation disappear at your utterance. With a second command, let the constellation reappear." He gave the command, and the constellation disappeared. With a second command, the constellation came into being again. When the gods, his fathers, saw the effect of his utterance, they rejoiced and offered congratulation. Marduk is king. So he's given the power to make and unmake. And again, this gives you the idea of what creation is all about. It's actually an interplay between destruction and creation, which is the engine of life. And you can see that principle again here. So the ending I have here somewhere. One of these windows. Yes, here it is. I've got the whole text of the Enuma Elish here, by the way, and I'll just drop that in the link. There's a bunch of prelude, essentially. There's a big party in heaven for Marduk, and they bless him, and they say many things about, how his weapons, let them slay his enemies, let them not miss the mark, etc., etc. He's anointed and exalted. Okay, so they set him up to slay Tiamat. It says, "He fashioned a bow and made it his weapon. He set an arrow in place, put the bowstring on. He took up his club and held it in his right hand. His bow and quiver he hung at his side. He placed lightning before him and filled his body with tongues of flame. He made a net to enmesh the entrails of Tiamat and stationed the four winds that no part of her escape." So he's using the four winds to hem her in. So again, this is more storm god stuff, right? He sent out the seven winds that he had fashioned, and he took their stand behind him to harness Tiamat's entrails. There's a fourfold wind and a seven wind because he adds three more, the evil wind, the dust storm, and the tempest to the original four winds. So that's how he gets seven. And they took up their stand behind him to harness Tiamat's entrails. Baal took up the storm flood, his great weapon. He rode the fearful chariot of the irresistible storm. 4 steeds he yoked to it and harnessed them to him. the destroyer, the merciless, the trampler, the fleet. Their lips were parted, their teeth bore venom. They were strangers to weariness, trained to sweep forward. At his right hand he stationed raging battle and strife. On the left, conflict that overwhelms a united battle array. So let's see here. He's clad in a tunic, wears an aura of terror. He set his face toward the raging Tiamat. In his lips he held a spell. He grasped a plant to counter poison in his hand, because Tiamat's very poisonous. Thereupon they milled around him, the gods milled around him, the gods his fathers milled around him. Baal drew near, surveying the maw of Tiamat. He observed the tricks of Kingu, her spouse. As he looked, he lost his nerve. His determination went, and he faltered. His divine aides who were marching at his side saw the warrior, the foremost, and their vision became dim. Tiamat cast her spell without turning her neck. In her lips she held untruth and lies. Baal lifted up the storm flood, his great weapon, and with these words threw it at the raging Tiamat. Why are you aggressive and arrogant, and strive to provoke battle? The younger generation have shouted, outraging their elders, but you, their mother, hold pity and contempt. Kingu you have named to be your spouse, and you have improperly appointed him to the rank of Anuship. Against Ansar, king of the gods, you have stirred up trouble, and against the gods, my fathers, your trouble is established. Deploy your troops, gird on your weapons, you and I will take our stand and do battle. When Tiamat heard this, she went insane and lost her reason. Tiamat cried aloud and fiercely, and all her lower members trembled beneath her. She was reciting an incantation, kept reciting her spell, while the battle gods were sharpening their weapons of war. Tiamat and Marduk, the sage of the gods, came together, joining in strife, drawing near to battle. Baal spread out his net and enmeshed her. He let loose the evil wind, the rear guard, in her face. Tiamat opened her mouth to swallow it. She let the evil wind in so that she could not close her lips. The fierce winds weighed down her belly. Her innards, I think, were distended, and she opened her mouth wide. He let fly an arrow and pierced her belly. So basically, he throws the storm wind at her, and that blows up her body and prevents her from closing her mouth. Then he shoots the arrow into her belly, and it says he tore open her entrails and slit her inwards. He bound her and extinguished her life. He threw down her corpse and stood on it. After he had killed Tiamat, their leader, her assembly dispersed, her host scattered. And then let me skip ahead to the important part here. There's more warfare, but the important part is the creation of the world. So it says, after the warrior Marduk had bound and slain his enemies, had established victory for Ansar over his foes, had fulfilled the desire of Nudinimud, he strengthened his hold on the bound gods and returned to Tiamat, whom he had bound. He placed his feet on the lower part of Tiamat, and with his merciless club smashed her skull. He severed her arteries, and let the north wind bear up her blood to give the news. His fathers saw it and were glad and exulted. Let's see. In order to divide the lump by a clever scheme, he split her in two like a dried fish. One half of her he set up and stretched out as the heavens. He stretched out the skin and appointed a watch, with the instruction not to let her waters escape. So we're now, you can see what's happening here. We're holding back the heavenly waters of chaos with the body of the chaos serpent. And then it says, he crossed over the heavens, surveyed the celestial parts, and adjusted them to match the Absu, Nudinimud's abode. He measured the shape of the Absu, set up Asara, he set the heavens, he settled their shrines, he fashioned heavenly stations for the gods, he set up the constellations in the pattern of stars, appointed the year and the divisions, the 12 months, and then there's more creation here. He placed the heights of heaven in Tiamat's belly. He created Nenar, entrusting to him the night. Let's see. The foam which Tiamat, something, Marduk fashioned, something. And when I say something, that means it's missing a line. He gathered it together and made it into clouds. So he's made clouds out of Tiamat. The raging of the winds, violent rainstorms, the billowing of mist, the accumulation of her spittle. He appointed for himself and took them in his hand. He put her head in position and poured out. He opened the abyss, and it was sated with water. So he's pouring out her water, which is a theme we always see when the dragon is slain. There's always floods because the dragon either blocks the water or is the ocean, something like that. Then it says, from her two eyes, he let the Euphrates and Tigris flow. He blocked her nostrils, but left something. He heaped up the distant mountains on her breasts. He bored wells to channel the springs. Her twisted tail, he wove it into Derma, which is a place, I think. Her crotch gets wedged up in the heavens. The other half of her, he stretched out and made firm as the earth. After he finished his work inside Tiamat, he spread his net and let it ride out. He surveyed the heavens and the earth, their bonds. So I think that's enough, but you guys get the idea. So he has made the world out of a slain dragon. And this is the model. Okay, so we're going to see this, some version of this repeated with all these other creation myths and all these other dragon slayer myths. So is this making sense so far, guys? How are we doing? Just real quick, I just see this. Mesopotamian is more of a conglomerate term, refers to the area, several cultures within Mesopotamia, which would be Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon, chiefly. So the Egyptian creation myths, these are really interesting, and we're going to see a lot of echoes here of everything that we just talked about. So there's Egyptian creation, there's several different cosmogonies, which is a creation myth. In all of them, they're said to have emerged from an infinite, lifeless sea, which is called Nu, and either the sun arose from that sea, or the primordial mound from which the sun is born. Different myths attribute the creation to different gods. There's the set of 8 primordial deities called the Ogdoad, like I said. There's the self-engendered god Atum, which is kind of like the sun, but is really more like the animating power of the universe. There's Ptah, who speaks the world into existence, but they all have something in common, which is that primordial chaos ocean. So the creation myth of Hermopolis focused on the nature of the universe before the creation of the world. The inherent qualities of the primeval waters were represented by a set of 8 gods called the Ogdoad. Now, the interesting thing here is that there's 4 pairs of gods that are all male and female, and the female deities are associated with snakes. So there's Nonet and Nu, which represent the primeval water itself. It's Huh, I guess that's Ha, and his counterpart Hahet, which represents the water's infinite extent. Kek and Kokhet personified the darkness within the water, and Amun and Amunet represented its hidden and knowable nature, in contrast to the tangible world of the living. So we've got, the Egyptians are so esoteric that they separated the primordial chaos ocean into 8 different ideas, or 4 different ideas and 8 deities. And the reason why they did that is because they need 2 things to mix to create the action. They need chemistry. So these are aquatic figures. They dwell within the water. The males are depicted as frogs, the females as snakes. And these 2 groups eventually converge, which results in the great upheaval, which produced the primordial mound, the pyramid mound. And from that emerges the sun, which rose into the sky to light the world. And that is the creation. Okay, so then we're going to go to Heliopolis. The creation was attributed to Atum, a deity closely associated with Ra, who was said to have existed in the waters of Nu as an inert potential being. So now forget about the Ogdoad, it's just Atum inside the cosmic ocean. He was a self-engendered god, the source of all elements and forces in the world. And the Heliopolitan myth describes the process, Heliopolitan, that's the word. It means of Heliopolis. Describes the process by which he evolved from a single being into a multiplicity of elements. Process began when Atum appeared on the mound. He gives rise to the air god Shu and his sister Tefnut, who represents moisture. And this represents the emergence of an empty space amid the waters. To explain how Atum did this, the myth uses the metaphor of masturbation, with the hand he used in this act representing the female principle inherent within him. Don't blame me, blame the Egyptians. He's also said to have sneezed and spat to produce Shu and Tefnut. Then Shu and Tefnut coupled to produce the earth god Geb and the sky goddess Nut, who defined the limits of the world. So what this means is that essentially we've got air and moisture that gives birth to the heavens and the earth. So you can see this as the primordial waters become 2 separate kinds of waters, which become the heaven and the earth. So this is the same kind of idea of one unity giving us waters that need to be separated, and then the sky and the ground, and there you go. So Geb and Nut, the earth and the sky, in turn give rise to 4 children who represent the forces of life. Osiris is the god of fertility and regeneration. Isis, the goddess of motherhood. Set is now the incarnation of chaos. And Nephthys, the female complement of Set. It says the myth thus represented the process by which life was made possible. These 9 gods were grouped together as the Ennead, but the 8 lesser gods and all things in this world were ultimately seen as extensions of Atum. This is similar to Indian Vedic mythology, where all the gods are really just echoes and manifestations of one force. And there's a lot of versions of that idea in Vedic mythology, which are all really interesting. So now we go to Memphis. This one has Ptah. He's a craftsman god. So he represents the craftsman's ability to envision a finished product and shape raw materials to create the product. The Memphite theology says that Ptah created the world in a similar way, but unlike other Egyptian creations, it's not a physical but an intellectual creation by the word and the mind of God. And Ptah speaks all this into existence, just like Yahweh. So the ideas developed within Ptah's heart, which is regarded by the Egyptians as the seat of human thought, the heart, and then were given form when he named them with his tongue. By speaking the names, he produced the gods and all other things. So in the creation myth, this one coexisted with that of Heliopolis, as Ptah's creative thought and speech were believed to have caused the formation of Atum and the Ennead. So think about Ptah as like a manifestation of will, essentially. He is the will of Atum, his voice, his conceiving of things. Remember how we talked about chaos and order as potential and then created reality? That's kind of the concept here. Ptah, he thinks about the potential, speaks it into being, and that becomes Atum. Like I said, there's different creative myths, but you can see how they're all related and expressing the same ideas of a unity and a division. I don't want to repeat myself, but you guys get the point here. So now we go to Thebes. It says Theban theology claimed that Amun was not merely a member of the Ogdoad, but the hidden force behind all things. There is a conflation of all notions of creation in the personality of Amun. He's a synthesis which emphasizes how Amun transcends all other deities in his being, quote, beyond the sky and deeper than the underworld. One Theban myth likened Amun's act of creation to the call of a goose, which broke the stillness of the primeval waters and caused the Ogdoad and the Ennead to form. So again, it's a sound, an instinct, a thought which creates. So at the same time, because he's the ultimate source of creation, all the gods, including the other creators, were in fact just aspects of Amun. Amun eventually became the supreme god of the Egyptian pantheon because of this. And then let's see, he's also synonymous with the growth of Thebes as a major religious capital. Thebes was thought as the location of the emergence of the primeval mound at the beginning of time. I want to talk about the goddess Nut. But before I do that, I think I actually want to bounce back to Kali, because Kali and Nut make very interesting comparisons. Okay, so let's go to Kali. So we're going over to Ancient History Encyclopedia here for the basic Kali stuff. She's associated with death, time, doomsday, sexuality, violence, but also motherly love and creation. She embodies Shakti, which is a very important concept. It's the feminine energy, the creativity, the fertility. It's basically the animating force of the universe, Shakti. And that is an incarnation of Pavarti. So Pavarti and Kali are aspects of one another. And the thing about Kali is that Kali actually exists outside of time. Kali represents the ultimate primordial chaos ocean. She's described as the blackness beneath the stars, between the stars. And my favorite Kali description comes from Sri Ramakrishna, who was an Indian Hindu mystic saint and religious leader in 19th century Bengal. And he experienced spiritual ecstasies from a young age, was influenced by several religious traditions, and he just wrote some beautiful stuff about Kali. This really will give you the idea of what we're talking about. I almost decided to start with this, so just to give you an idea of how important this is. So this is a quote from Sri Ramakrishna. My mother is the principle of consciousness. She is Akhanda Satchidananda. It means indivisible reality, awareness, and bliss. The night between the stars is perfectly black. The waters of the ocean depths are the same. The infinite is always mysteriously dark. This inebriating darkness is my beloved Kali. Reality with attributes, Saguna Brahman, has been unanimously declared by the Vedas, Puranas, and Tantras to be Mahakali, the primordial energy of awareness. Her energy is like the rays of the sun. The original sun is attributeless reality, which is Nagurna Brahman, which means boundless awareness alone. So proceed to the original thought. The original, through its radiance, awakened to non-dual reality through Mother Kali. So let me explain what he's talking about here. So when he talks about Brahman, Brahman is a twin concept to Kali. It's basically the awareness or the animating force of the entire universe. And so that idea of Shakti is like an incarnated power of Kali. Yes, someone is asking me for the link here. Absolutely. And I'm going to put all these in the description of the video. So if you're watching after the fact, all these links that I'm quoting from they'll be below. So Kali is, because she exists outside of time and creation, she creates everything, but also destroys everything at the end of time. She represents time in the sense that like time is a construct of her. She creates it and destroys it. And that is why she's outside of time. She is the primordial chaos. A lot of these myths, when we see the waters being separated, the primordial chaos is like pinned back above the sky or outside the realm of men. The Midgard Ocean that circles the Norse world, that's the same idea. It's the defining borders of reality. So Kali is that essence. And the cool thing about Shakti is that Shakti is kind of like the Holy Spirit. If you're familiar with Christianity, Shakti is the power of divinity that lives inside of us. And it's an aspect of Pavarti and Kali. So think about how cool that is. Like when you awaken the Kundalini serpent through meditation, that is Shakti power. And so the Indian sages through yoga were essentially trying to awaken their inner divinity, to elevate their consciousness and transcend. And they saw that as activating the piece of the divine that was inside of them, which is literally a piece of the primordial chaos. Here's why that's important. Remember I said chaos isn't evil. It's not a monster. It's a creative instinct. It's the potential for things to exist that don't exist yet. So think about that. Think about channeling that creative non-existence, that singularity that is before duality, channeling that power into you and out of you. And then you yourself can create things. So that's why I love this concept. It's so mind-blowing. And we find it echoed in a lot of other religions where there's some sort of like, remember we just said Atum was not the sun, but the power behind everything. But then that Atum power gets channeled through the sun. And we just saw Sri Ramakrishna also refer to Kali as the sun. Her energy is like the rays of the sun. So think about the sun as like not the original source of sun power, but like an avatar of Kali's power that shines onto us. That's the same thing with Egyptian reality. Even though Ra is a sun god, there were several other deities that were thought of as the eye of Ra, like Hathor. And basically, she comes out of Ra when Ra's angry and becomes Sekhmet, this destroying lioness. But it's really just the power of Ra. And so you could also say that Ra is powered by that divine mother energy. It kind of goes round and round because, again, these are just all different ways of getting at the same concept of that creative chaos instinct, which is a pair to structure and finite reality. Let's see here. I think there's one other thing I wanted to get here. Ah, yes. So this is from Swami Vivekananda. The calm sea is the absolute. The same sea in waves is divine mother. She is time, space, and causation. And that's the key word, causation. God is mother and has two natures, the conditioned and the unconditioned. As the former, she is God, nature, and soul, which is humanity. And as the latter, she is unknown and unknowable. Out of the unconditioned came the Trinity God, nature and soul, the triangle of existence. A bit of mother, a drop, was Krishna. Another was Buddha. Another was Christ. The worship of even one spark of mother in our earthly mother leads to greatness. Worship her if you want love and wisdom. So several things there. We've got, again, that principle of duality, non-existence and existence, the unknown and the knowable. That gives rise to the original trinity of Hindu mythology, which I believe is, so it's Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. But those are all aspects of kind of the same God anyway. So creation and destruction, round and round in a cycle. There's several stories of Kali's birth. The thing about these aren't really the creation of Kali. This is Kali incarnating. Remember, Kali exists outside of time. So there is no creation of Kali, really. But there are legends where she incarnates that have very familiar themes. So one version relates when the warrior goddess Durga, who's an aspect of Parvati, had 10 arms, each carrying a weapon, and who rode a lion or tiger in battle, fought with Mahisa, the buffalo demon. Durga became so enraged that her anger burst forth from her forehead in the form of Kali. Now, once born, the black goddess went wild, and Kali means the black one because she represents space and the primordial ocean. So the black goddess went wild and ate all the demons she came across, stringing their heads on a chain which she wore around her neck. It seems impossible to calm Kali's bloody attacks, which now extended to any wrongdoers, and both people and gods were at a loss what to do. Fortunately, the mighty Shiva stopped Kali's destructive rampage by lying down in front of her path, and when the goddess realized who she was standing on, she calmed down, because Shiva is her divine consort. And from this story is explained Kali's association with battlegrounds. And you'll also see that's like the most common depiction of Kali, where she's trampling on Shiva. She's dancing or trampling, and Shiva's underneath. So Shiva is essentially sacrificing himself to stop the chaos. And yes, the idea of Kali bursting from the third eye, that just shows you that she is the Kundalini Shakti energy. She is the creative God power that can create, that can generate, that can elevate, transcend, all those kinds of ideas. Oh, that's a good analogy. Yeah, Kali is kind of like a black hole or dark energy gravity. Yeah, totally. It is very similar to that. And Quinn reminded me that the reason why anything exists in the universe is because there is slightly more matter than antimatter, or vice versa. I forget what it is, but there's a slight imbalance, and that is what leads to the instability that caused everything to move around and create. If everything was totally even, everything would sort of just be in stasis and be inert. So you can see how chaos is needed to create, right? All right, so another version of Kali's birth, Parvati sheds her dark skin, which then becomes Kali. Hence, one of her names is Kaushika, the sheath, while Parvati is left as Gauri, the fair one. This story emphasizes Kali's blackness, which is symbolic of the eternal darkness and which has the potential to both destroy and create. So the bright goddess comes from the primordial darkness. That's kind of the message there. In a third vision, men and gods were being terrorized by Daruka, who could only be killed by a woman, and Parvati was asked by the gods to deal with the troublesome demon. She responded by jumping down Shiva's throat. And this is because many years previously, Shiva had swallowed hala hala, which is the poison, hala hala, the poison which has risen from the churning of the ocean during the creation and which had threatened to pollute the world. By combining with the poison that still was held in Shiva's throat, Parvati was transformed into Kali. Leaping from Shiva's throat in her new guise, Kali swiftly dispatched Daruka, and all was well with the world once more. You can see what's happening there. And that is, so here's another, and there's, by the way, I tried to look up Vedic creation myths, and I went like this, and I had 8 heads and 4 faces, because there's a lot of Vedic Indian creation myths, but one of them has Indra separating heaven and earth, which is important echo, because that's obviously the storm god creating the earth by separating things. But there's also this idea that Shiva had to drink this poison, and it was risen from the churning of the ocean. So this is, what does this tell you? This is evil, chaos, ocean stuff. Shiva swallowed it, but then when Parvati wants to incarnate as Kali, she jumps down his throat and merges with that chaos ocean and comes back out as Kali. So you can see, even in these other myths, which aren't really like the birth of Kali, it's rather the incarnation of Kali, but it always carries these primordial chaos ocean ideas. Pretty cool stuff, pretty cool stuff. And guys, I'm actually gonna go grab my birds. I've left them in the room, they're going crazy. So I'm gonna bring them out and give them a little time and see how that goes. So 1 second, I'll be right back. I'm trying to present the sacred knowledge, guys. I'm doing my best, So let's see, we've done Vedic creation myths, Egyptian creation myths, Sumerian and Genesis creation myths, Greek creation myths. Not going to go super in depth here, but you will see the echoes. So in one version, we've got Chaos, which is an actual goddess. gives birth to Gaia, which is the earth, and Tartarus, which is the underworld. So again, from chaos, a unity, we have now a duality of earth and the underworld. But the third thing born is Eros, which is love. And so once love as an animating force is in the world, then chaos and Gaia, which are the two female deities, the honeys, if you will, they are now able to have children. And so Gaia gives birth to Ornos, which is the sky. So now we've got the earth and the underworld and the sky. And then Gaia proceeds to give birth to everything else living because she is, of course, Mother Earth. Now, Chaos is a goddess. She only gets to give birth to two people, which are Erebus, darkness, and Nyx, which is night. So that makes sense, right? Darkness and night come from chaos. They are aspects of the chaos sea, the primordial darkness, if you will. So again, similar to Kali here, right? Then we've got, in the second version, instead it was Kronos who was first. Kronos, of course, represents time. So time is, again, Kali is associated with time. So in this sense, Kronos is existing as the first thing, the first unitary thing. And from him, we get Erebus, which again is darkness, Chaos, the goddess Chaos, and Aether, which means divine air. So then it's thought that Chaos is this artist and craftsman, kind of like Ptah, if you will. I don't know if the P is silent, by the way, on Ptah. And yes, I just call the goddesses honeys. They're the first, they're the divine honeys. They're the ultimate honeys. You could even call Gaia a thought, I think. So anyways, yeah, we're immature here. Like I said, I didn't go to college. We're not here for scholarly veneers. We're here to get after the true meaning of all this stuff. So we've got Chaos as an artist. She crafts an egg, the primordial egg, which you also find in some of the Egyptian myths, by the way. She crafts an egg from the aether, from non-physical stuff. And out of this egg comes a very cool deity called Phanes. Phanes is an androgynous deity who gives birth to everything living by procreating with himself, because he's both male and female. Phanes looks kind of like Mithras. He's got a snake wrapped around, and I think I have a picture of Phanes actually that I can pull up. And of course, just a quick word here. There's a lot of talk about social justice warriors and political correctness, and people now are using pronouns other than him and her, defining their gender outside of the typical gender norms. Well, guess what? That's not new. None of that is new. If you go back into mythology, you're going to find a lot of funky genders flipping, androgynous gods, hermaphroditic gods. Every kind of sexual relationship is depicted. Every kind of gender identity, they're all there because, again, not only because those things exist in the real world, but because we're talking about concepts here. We're talking about transformation, chemistry, alchemy, and stuff like that. So you have father gods, like procreating with their children, and all just kinds of weird stuff. So here's your non-binary superhero, I guess, a role model. That's what I'm trying to say. There's good old Phanes. So you can see some of the Mithras symbolism here. Got the snake, got a spear. There's a lot of fire symbolism. Yeah, so that's Phanes. The Phanes, actually, so the word Phanes does have a male connotation, even though it's an androgynous deity. So for what it's worth, Phanes was a deity of light and goodness. The name means to bring light or to shine. So this is the firstborn god of light who emerges from the void or the watery abyss and gives birth to the universe. Other times, the cosmic egg that Phanes emerges from is made by Kronos, time, and Ananke, which is necessity or fate. Again, you have these idea of these two principal forces that are non-existent, non-corporeal, time and necessity. And from that comes the primordial egg, which is basically a physical manifestation of the chaos from which hatches all life on Earth. You can see, again, these ideas so similar, right? I mean, you can change the order of it, how many gods give birth to how many gods, male and female, all these things, but it's always the same idea of structure coming out of chaos. It's exciting, isn't it, girl? Yeah, it's exciting. So now Norse creation, I see you guys already mentioning this in the chat, popping up. Of course, in Norse creation, we have the giant Ymir, Y-M-I-R. So Ymir is the ancestor of all giants. And well, let me just read actually from the Poetic Edda. It says, there was in times of old where Ymir dwelt, nor sand nor sea, nor gelid waves. Earth existed not, nor heaven above. 'Twas a chaotic chasm, and grass nowhere. So picture Ymir as this primeval giant sitting in this abyss, a chaotic chasm. There's no grass, there's no earth, there's no heavens, there's no sky, and it's just Ymir. But then Ymir somehow is killed, and his body is used to make the world. So it says, then went all the powers to their judgment seats, the all-holy gods, and thereon held council. Who should of the dwarfs race create from the sea giant's blood and livid bones? Ah, yes, so he's a sea giant. So that kind of gives you the idea. So it's ocean of chaos talk. And from Ymir's flesh, the earth was formed. From his bones, the hills, the heaven from the skull of that ice-cold giant, and from his blood, the sea. Of Ymir's flesh was the earth created, of his blood, the sea, of his bones, the hills, of his hair, trees and plants, of his skull, the heaven, of his brows, the gentle powers, formed Midgard for the sons of men, but of his brain, the heavy clouds are all created. So Ymir is not a dragon in any sense, but the rest of it matches the Chaoskampf myth perfectly, doesn't it? We've got a god who is slain, divided, drawn and quartered, and from that comes the physical reality. And instead of a chaos dragon, it's a chaos sea giant. So very cool. Another one says, another version in the Prose Edda, it says that Ymir was formed from the elemental drops. So too was Audumbla, a primeval cow whose milk Ymir fed from. And it says that 3 gods killed Ymir. It was Odin, Vili, and Ve. And upon Ymir's death, his blood caused an immense flood. So slightly different story, but gives you the same idea. There's always a flood, always a flood. Now, of course, there is a dragon slayer myth in Norse myth, and that's Jormungandr. Jormungandr is literally an ocean of chaos serpent. It becomes that way because it swallows the ocean of chaos, and then it grows so large that it can span the entire world-circling ocean. And then it ends up grasping its own tail in an Ouroboros that encircles Midgard. The thing is that when Ragnarok comes, one of the signs of Ragnarok is that Jormungandr is going to release his own tail, and this will let loose the chaotic waters and start destroying the world. And there's a recurring bound monster theme in Norse mythology. Fenrir is the brother of Jormungandr. Fenrir is similarly bound in chains until Ragnarok. So it's this idea that the chaotic forces, they're bound so that we can exist. It's like all these deities that restrained the primordial waters or pinned them back above the sky. Sometimes the dragon monsters are held captive in an underground cave or something like that in other echoes. The Avestan Zoroastrian version of the dragon slayer myth has the dragon captive under a mountain. Typhon is captive under a mountain. And so basically this binding up of chaos is what allows humankind to exist. But at the end of days, the chaos comes back out. In the Bible, Yahweh has to slay the Leviathan again. And I haven't talked about Yahweh and the Leviathan, but even though Yahweh created, we did the creation myth of Yahweh, right? Where he's just moving over the primordial waters. However, later in Psalms, it speaks of God having slaughtered Leviathan to create the world. This is, of course, just borrowed from Baal-Hadad and Canaanite myth as well as Sumerian myth, because the creator of the world is supposed to slay a Leviathan. Yahweh is also supposed to slay the Leviathan again at the end of time. So it's a very similar idea to the Norse myth here. That's because chaos is never really defeated, right? So there's this monotheistic idea that the God of order is one day going to completely vanquish chaos. But that's, of course, a very silly idea. That will never happen. The Jormungandr Thor myths are really fun. It's not just the Ragnarok one. So again, like I said, at Ragnarok, Jormungandr is loose. Thor is going to kill Jormungandr, but not before he's bitten. And it says that Thor is going to take 9 steps. and then he will die from the poison of Jormungand. So they kind of kill each other. But they have 2 encounters before that. And this first one is just really great. So Thor and the other gods, they go to the castle of Skirmir, who's a Jotun. So they're going to the land of the giants, to a giant's castle. If they want to stay and get hospitality, they have to overcome 3 challenges, which are given to Thor. So first, Thor is challenged to lift the house cat of the giants, but he can't. He can only lift 1 paw, okay, or half the cat. And it's too heavy. So then Thor, he's great at drinking, he's given a horn of ale from the giants. And they're like, yeah, see if you can empty it. Well, Thor drinks as much as he can. He only gets it just below the rim. That's all he can drink. Then he says, well, give me someone to fight. I can fight. And so they give him the oldest maid in the entire castle, but she can't be defeated either. And so Thor loses all 3 challenges. But the next day, their Jotun host, Skirmir, confesses his trickery. And he says, well, actually, that house cat was Jormungandr in disguise. And you almost lifted Jormungandr from the ocean, very nearly. So that's how strong Thor is. He almost was able to lift the world serpent out of the ocean, but of course he couldn't because it's not time for that. So he tried to drink the ale from the horn and couldn't. Well, that ale, that was the entire ocean that was linked to the horn. So Thor was trying to drink the ocean. He almost did it, supposedly, but couldn't. And so that maid, the maid is old age, and old age has never been defeated and cannot be defeated. All 3 of those concepts are chaos dragon mother concepts, right? So Jormungandr literally is the chaos serpent. The ocean itself, well, the chaos serpent is just an avatar of the ocean. And old age, that's basically death. That is fate. That means that outside of life, there is a goddess which is waiting to greet you. That's just the Kali concept, right? When you die, you know, when the universe dies, we're defeated by old age, if you will. And many of these goddesses are also associated with the underworld, like Nut and Hathor, and aid the souls in rebirth for the same reason. So you can see that these 3 challenges, these were all actually tied to the Jormungandr concept: the ocean, the serpent, and old age. So that's pretty cool. And then in another myth, Thor goes fishing for Jormungandr with a severed bull's head, which is interesting because all the storm gods are associated with bulls. In some tales, Jormungandr escapes. In some cases, Thor is able to smash and kill Jormungandr. But so there's your dragon slayer myth. Oh yes, we didn't do Typhon. So let's go back to the Greek dragon slayer myth here. So Gaia and Tartarus, that's heaven and the underworld. They created Typhon to stop the takeover of the younger Olympian gods from the Titans. So he is constructed as an avatar of all the Titans. So he's a combined of all the god force combined into one, kind of like the Kali idea, being sort of a manifestation of the god power. And similar to Marduk being a champion of the gods too, like all the gods exalt Marduk to make him their champion so that he can take on the serpent. We have Typhon given all the energy and power of the Titans. Typhon is the upper body of a man, and then the legs are a bunch of snakes. He breathes fire. He's as tall as the sky. So he's kind of like a monster, a serpent monster. So everyone runs but Zeus, and even Zeus is overpowered. One tale, he's taken captive, and another tale, Typhon merely cuts out his sinews and incapacitates Zeus. Hermes has to go collect the sinews to restore Zeus's strength, and at that point, Zeus is able to fight and destroy Typhon with thunderbolts. The slaying of Typhon leads to the ascendance of the Olympian gods and also the near destruction of the world. Okay, I've had enough, Goose. I got to put Goose back. Come here, Goose. Like I said, it's just another mirror. There's another storm god, another bull god. That's Zeus, just like Thor, just like all these, just like Indra, storm gods. Lightning is the weapon that we use to kill the dragon. Almost every time, storm winds, lightning. These are the weapons of the storm gods. So, and then, like I said, either the world is created or the world is remade. One of those things always happens. Let's see. Gosh, oh man, I've gotten through most of my information here. Well, let's talk about Lotan a bit and Baal Hadad. So in the Canaanite myth, like I said, is very close to Hebrew myth, because Hebrew myth grew out of Canaanite myth in some respects, not in all respects, but in some respects. What we've got here is Lotan. Lotan is the multi-headed dragon. And I guess I forgot to mention that most of these dragons are multi-headed dragons. Varitra, that's slain by Indra, is a multi-headed dragon. So is Leviathan and a few of the other ones. So Lotan, he's a multi-headed dragon. Lotan is paired with the sea god Yam. And sometimes Yam creates Lotan as a champion. Sometimes they look like terms for the same deity. So there's confusion about that. But this story is mostly found in the Ugarit cycle, which is found in the city of Ugarit. It's called the Baal cycle, which is found in Ugarit. And this is about 1400, 1200 BCE. Although Baal Hadad worship goes back to 2500 BC. And just so you know, the word Baal, B-A'-Al, can both be a generic term for God and a specific god that is usually has things added to it. So Baal Hadad is the Baal of Hadad, or he's the god Hadad. But Baal Hadad is the storm god associated with bulls, lightning as the weapons. Ugaritic records show him as a weather god with particular power over lightning, wind, rain, and fertility. The dry summers are explained as the time when Baal is in the underworld, because Baal is kind of like a corn king. He does the rebirth thing. He's an avatar of nature. And then when he returns in the autumn, that causes the storms and the rains, which revive the land. So he's very much a fertility god, and his worship is tied to, the crops growing, et cetera, et cetera. And he eventually supplanted El as the leader of the pantheon. Of course, El is the father god. So that matches the pattern that we've been talking about. So he held special enmity against snakes, both on their own and as representatives of Yamu, who is Yam, the sea. So here we have this idea that serpents are representative of the sea god, or might be the sea god. So we've related words that mean twisted serpent, fugitive serpent, and of course the word Leviathan means twisted and coiled. And the word that the Bible uses for Leviathan is related to Lotan. Another epithet is mighty one with 7 heads. So this is just, more of the same. I hate to say more of the same, but it's another storm god vanquishing a multi-headed sea god. This isn't the creation of the world, but it is the establishment of Baal as the king of gods. And in the Hebrew version, this is as tied to the establishing of Israel as a people. So there's a parallel to that, because it has to do with the Red Sea. So most of the myth of Moses is not corroborated by history. However, the idea of God dividing the waters to let the people of Israel through the Red Sea so they can create a new nation is thought of by some as an echo of this idea that creation comes from dividing the waters. So that may be the reason why that is in that myth. Which is mostly, it seems to be a legend. Although I will say that there is some research that shows the name Yahweh originated in a part of the Sinai Peninsula, sort of made its way into the Levant, which could be part of the story of Moses. If you remember, he spent a lot of time in Sinai when he left Egypt, and then, of course, led the Israelites to Sinai, where they lingered for a long time before they entered the Promised Land. So could be some truth to all that. So is there anything else I want to say about the Baal cycle? I kind of stole the thunder with the Sumerian one, but if you want the link for that, I'll drop it in. And there's another very cool link that has parallels. This is from a Christian scholar. It was highlighting the parallels between Baal and Yahweh. Because like I said, Yahweh was a storm god, and so was Baal. And essentially what you had in ancient Levant, as the Hebrews separated themselves from the Canaanites, moved towards polytheism, they looked to elevate their god, Yahweh, above the other gods, and eventually then moved to saying that he was the only one that existed. But before they got all the way to monotheism, they were doing something called henotheism, which is when you acknowledge a pantheon of gods, but lift up one as the god of your tribe or city or people. And a lot of the Canaanites practiced henotheism. So each city would have its own god, even though they acknowledged the other ones. Same thing for Mesopotamia. And so what you had is, if you look in the Bible, there's all these references to the Israelites kind of backsliding and worshiping Baal or Asherah. And those are simply older Canaanite deities, which were once totally fine to worship. And there's even a period in the Bible where Asherah poles, which are like sacred wooden idols meant to be like trees, because Asherah's has a sacred tree. Clea, you have to either go one place or the other, girl. There was a time when you had the Asherah sacred wooden poles in the temple alongside the pillars, altars to Yahweh. And there's actually verses in the Bible where a certain king is like, tear down the Asherah idols and take them out of the temple. We don't do that anymore. And of course, there's other serpent ideas in the Bible where the serpent is good, like when Moses puts the serpent on the rod and that heals people. And also Moses' staff turns into a serpent. But then other times the serpent is, the serpent in the Garden of Eden, or it's the Leviathan that God is slaying. And all of those things have connections to otherworld mythology. So I think I've pretty much hit most everything I want to hit with these notes. I may have left out a couple of things, but I pretty much covered it all. So guys, thanks for joining me. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Have a happy weekend. I hope I presented this in a clear and concise fashion and didn't step on too many toes. Hope I didn't offend too many people, but I try to approach this again with respect and humility and awe, because I definitely have a sense of awe about this. Gods and goddesses and myths are fun, but guys, the point is these philosophy. It's these esoteric ideas. What is the power that drives the world? What causes people to do things? What creates life? So these are the ideas that the ancients were trying to answer with all these myths. So thanks, everyone. I really appreciate you coming out, supporting me, talking about this stuff. So see you next time.